anniversary, a minute-by-minute harrowing account by the author of Black Saturday to take us through the events of October 7th. Trey Yingst. 2, what caught my attention? Everything from Kamala Harris appearing on the Sex podcast, Call Her Daddy, to Michael Cohen saying Donald Trump's going to send SEAL Team 6 after Democrats. 3, a weekend of upsets that took down Alabama but spared the Dallas Cowboys. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page, terrestrial radio, market to market across the country, but always on demand by simply subscribing at Apple or on Spotify. If you're watching the Will Cain Show on YouTube or on Facebook, jump into the comments section, join the militia, hit subscribe, and join us every Monday through Thursday live at 12 o'clock Eastern Time for the Will Cain Show. We have a big show with you today, a lot of news happening over the weekend and happening as we speak. But it is the one-year anniversary of October 7th. And we have the ability to walk through a first-person account and in-depth reporting on not just what happened 1 year ago, but what has happened since with the war in Israel. We've got a big show with you today. We're going to start with Trey Yingst and story number 1. Trey Yingst is Fox News foreign correspondent. He is also the author of a brand new book, Black Saturday, an unfiltered account of the October 7th attack on Israel and the war in Gaza. Trey's joining us right now live from southern Israel, and I'm honored to have you on this day today, Trey. Thanks for being on the Will Cain Show.
Yeah, Will, thanks for having me.
So, Trey, I've read through the book. It is heart-pulsing. I mean, it is a minute-by-minute account, not just of your own personal experience, but obviously all those you've managed to talk to before and after the events of October 7th. You know, you begin the book really talking about how you were woken up that morning and how you experienced it. You know, I think if anybody wants to feel, not just know, but feel what it was like, they need to check out Black Saturday. So I think I'll start kind of broad, Trey. 1 year later, what moment do you feel that stays with you? What is the moment from that day forward that's staying with Trey Yingst?
It's tough because when I look back on this first week of coverage following the October 7th massacre, a lot of it's a blur. And I tried my best to take photos and take notes in preparation for writing this book, Black Saturday. But my team and I arrived in southern Israel on the morning of October 7th as the massacre was unfolding. We're back a year later reporting from these communities today. And you can see the house behind me was one of those impacted by the Hamas attack when these militants crossed from Gaza into southern Israel. And actually, interestingly, in the book, one of the most difficult days that I chronicle is a time in a community called Be'eri, and it's a community that I'm sitting in right now. And we arrived here with the army in the days after the October 7th massacre, and we saw bodies everywhere. This area was filled with dead residents and militants that really, it's hard to put into words, Will, how horrific the scenes were. Because we went into these houses like the one behind me, and we saw the aftermath of a massacre where people were slaughtered. The bloodstained floors, the broken windows and doors where people were sheltering in their mamads, their bomb shelters, when these gunmen broke in. And so I think that coming to this community personally was one of the hardest for me. And that's part of the reason that I came back today, a year later. And I want to continue documenting this so that people know what happened here and they know about the horrors of October 7th.
That's just stunning to me, Trey, because, you know, I'll be honest, just a few hours ago, I was reading your chapter on that kibbutz right there. And you talked to us, those readers of Black Saturday, about the people. You let us know who they were, you know, and to see you sitting now in front of one of those homes and what I just got done reading about and what happened inside that home, it's really stunning. You know, one thing I would ask about where you're sitting right now, Trey, is help me understand that kibbutz, because I also know I don't ever want to turn one person or one community's personal tragedy into a symbol, but it also tells a larger story. And that is like, who's living there? How big was that? You know, I'm going to use a different word than kibbutz because sometimes I don't think that translates well to someone listening in America. You know, it's a village. It's a very, very small town, right? On the outpost, almost on the frontier. Can you just give me a little context of like, not just what happened there, but the people it happened to on October 7th.
Yeah, absolutely. The kibbutzim, the communities along the border, are very small towns, villages of just a few hundred people each. And they live in a way that's quite a simple life, actually. They share many resources. Some of them pool funding, and they live in a way that you would hear a small village hundreds of years ago lived. And they do that for many reasons. But in this area, they're very connected to the land and to their community. And so they choose to live in an area that, despite the fact historically came under rocket and mortar fire, was quite a beautiful place to live. Rolling hills and bike paths and places where you could walk to the store and you could walk to your neighbor's house. And the people, especially of this community in Be'eri, were known for being peace activists, interestingly. They are some of the most left of Israeli society, people who would spend their free time protesting the Israeli blockade on Gaza, driving Palestinian kids to Israeli hospitals. And they were some of the first hit on the morning of October 7th. And Be'eri represents, I think, the best part of Israeli society. The idea that coexistence is possible, that peace is possible. They are not people who hate or people who were extremely nationalistic. They were people who are accepting, who were willing to live alongside Palestinians and hope for a better future. And I think that Be'eri, again, represents the good of this society. And unfortunately, they were hit one of the hardest on the morning of October 7th.
You know, there's the obvious dichotomy of the community you just described. And again, I was reading about, you just told us about the blood on the floor, the blood on the walls. But there's also another interesting dichotomy you described that happened that day, in that you have there what I would presume, Trey, is maybe a politically liberal society, but a religiously conservative one, I would think, and, maybe some people that tend to be on the older end of the demographic. And then all of a sudden you walk us through these people fleeing the music festival. And I think the lady's name is Yamin, who comes running in, right? And you know what just stuck in my head, Trey? She was dressed skimpy. Like, we've seen images of the music festival that day, and these were kids having a, 20s, 30s, having a big time. And then that's kind of some of the first that community encounters. All of a sudden, these people running into their community, knocking on doors, dressed, whatever, party, scantily clad. And then not long after that, it sounds like 10 minutes later, then horror.
Yeah, this story of Yasmin, who with her boyfriend Tal came from the music festival that was actually just down the road from here. And ultimately they arrive at this older couple's house and they bang on the door and the couple lets them in. They make them coffee and ask them what's happening. And they're trying to piece together what's going on. And ultimately they hide in the mamad, the bomb shelter of the house, before it's stormed by Hamas. And it is a moment in the book that is challenging, I think, to read, because it was challenging to learn about.
Right.
Ultimately, the boyfriend of Yasmin is killed. And it's just another example of how quickly people's lives change. They were at a music festival in the morning, and by the afternoon, the boyfriend was dead, and Yasmin was traumatized after being a hostage for a period of time. Hamas had taken her and other residents into a house and held them until ultimately the Israeli military arrived and there was a firefight. And again, this is just one story out of thousands that took place on that horrific day.
So that's a transition in asking you about the music festival, which probably has gotten the most attention. And, not undeservedly. If the numbers are 1,200 dead, I think some quarter of that, 360 about, was from the music festival. I started the interview, Trey, asking you about sort of what you feel, what you've hung on to a year into this. You had a moment in the book where you talk about when you got access to the music festival, and you got access to the music festival like that kibbutz before it was quote unquote cleaned, meaning you saw bodies. And I think you're pointing to the bar. There's a bar where a lot of people got killed at the music festival. and the IDF guys yell at you, no cameras, no photos. And your job is to document, you said. And you may or may not use it on TV or social media, but you ended up using your phone to continue recording. But you said in that, maybe just only to remind me, to remind yourself of what you saw. And I don't know, even though all of us have seen so much, and largely through the words and pictures you've shared with us, Trey, I don't even know if in the end, I know it doesn't. I've been to some, not what you've seen, but natural disasters. It's just hard to communicate, right? And I don't know what you saw, but it just struck me, you having to say to yourself, I need to remember this.
Yeah, at so many of these places, we saw horrific scenes. And when we had arrived to the music festival, they had actually cleared all of the bodies out of there, but there were still remains on site when we got there. And in a way, this was in some way even more graphic, because these were the burned remains of the festival goers. And these likely soldiers, first responders, a mixture of people, were putting the remains into bags. And they told us, don't photograph it, don't take any video. And I use my cell phone at my waist and I take some video. And like I said, it was more just so that I could remember to tell people about that, because in the course of this reporting, your brain sees so many horrific things that, one, it blocks out a lot of things, and two, they're just such long hours on the front lines that you can't remember everything. And so I use my phone and my camera as almost a virtual diary, so that I can go back and say, okay, on this morning at this time, we saw this. And then I can remember to tell people about it so that people don't forget about that horrific day and the aftermath that we captured.
So I'm going to step back from the stories for just a moment. Again, I don't give gratuitous endorsements. I think you will learn, and again, you'll feel so much in Black Saturday. I want to ask you a couple, I guess there would be logistical questions, one out of curiosity and one which is a bit more political. But the curiosity one, so take me to the music festival. One thing I've always wondered, Trey, I never really fully got my arms around. It's chaos, clearly. Some leave, some don't. Some that do leave, it actually doesn't work out for them. Is that because of traffic or where they chose to flee to? Because you talk about a dairy farm where a lot of people fled and that, they were killed at the dairy farm. Did Hamas just surround the music festival? Was there tactical? I think for a lot of people, you sit there and you go, what would I have done? And I know that's not the right question, but it's almost a human nature question. Like, how could people have left once this started? How was there any commonality to the survivors?
There wasn't really a commonality among the survivors. There was one thing that I noticed among the interviews that I conducted, and that's largely that a lot of the people who kept going and kept moving survived. And I think that the initial instinct, because it was a rocket attack, and that's what everyone thought it was at first, some people did what you are told to do, which is go to a shelter. And they rushed to the shelters on the side of the road as these rockets were incoming. And Hamas stormed the shelters and threw hand grenades inside. And I remember one guy that we interviewed, he talks about being with his friend and they're drinking and having a good time. And when the attack starts, he tells him, like, let's go, we need to move. And his friend ultimately doesn't move with him and doesn't keep running. And he's killed in one of those shelters. And I think everyone had a different story. And sometimes it was just a matter of chance if they survived. One big issue was the road. There was only one road to exit the music festival. And it went two directions, but both directions ended up being blocked by Hamas. They created these roadblocks almost and killed everyone that drove toward them. And so that was one problem. There was immediate congestion. And so people got out of their cars and they started running through fields. And depending on the direction that they ran, they either were able to get to safety or they ran right into an ambush by Hamas.
Was it complete randomness, Trey, on who was killed versus who was taken hostage? Did that just depend upon the Hamas crew you ran into? Like, I mean, men and women were taken hostage. It wasn't like they were killing the men and taking the women. It was, a cross-section of people. Was that just randomness?
Yeah, it was random, and even down to the individual. There are stories in the book. One stands out, a woman named Hen from the community of Kfar Aza, and her husband is killed, her daughter is killed, but she is taken hostage along with her other two children. And they were all in the same safe room, but just the way that it played out, they survived and ultimately actually were released from Gaza, and that's how I interviewed her after she was released. But it is a remarkable instance of chance and luck for many people that they survived.
So here's the other, I don't guess logistical is the right word, but this is the part that I said is a bit more political. One thing that has always confounded me, you've reported on this for a year, is how it happens. Meaning, how does it escape Israeli intelligence? They know everything, every little thing that's coming. And this is a massive thing, Trey. And it's a massive thing that happened. And I don't understand to this day how.
Yeah, it was a massive intelligence failure. There were signs that were reported and then not delivered to the right commanders. Some of these younger soldiers who were tasked with watching the border reported these things, and they never made it up the chain. And I interviewed Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for this book, Black Saturday, and he admitted it was an intelligence failure, but he didn't know. And he's the top military official in the country. He had no idea, no warning.
What about the planning? And even the ahead of time planning? I know they have spies.
And I mean, they also have communication intercepts, and that's one thing. But the other thing is that they planned in broad daylight. And even I remember this back from 2018, 2019, and we've covered this story. I've personally covered it every day for the past 6 years. And there were times over the past several years that Hamas and Islamic Jihad released these videos of them training, and they were storming houses in Gaza. And they looked like houses like the one behind me. And no one ever really made anything of it. It was like, oh, okay, they're just doing some exercises. They have a military wing. But they were training to infiltrate into Israel. And the Israelis, I mean, that was public. The Israelis saw that, and they didn't act on it. And I think the one moment in the book that really stands out is I interviewed Gallant, and I asked him, what were you doing that morning? And he says, I was preparing to go mountain biking. And he tells me that he learned of the attack starting, not from the prime minister, not from his chief of staff, from his daughter, who called him.
Wow. You take us not just through the day and the immediate aftermath of October 7th, but you do follow the war. And, you do a good job, Trey, and I want to tell you that personally, but you do a good job of bringing all sides of all of these stories, which is important, So if I ask you about the ensuing war, in Gaza, what do you think is most important from the book and from your reporting that someone knows, and I almost ask that because despite your reporting or despite how much coverage it continues to receive, the public has a tendency to turn off after the big thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, especially for something so mired in I don't want to say it's not stagnant, but like even, Ukraine, Afghanistan, we arrive at a point where the public's attention, how about this, is fatigued. And you obviously, you're not, you may be, but you continue to give us exactly what's going on. So what is it you think that we're not giving attention to from the year we've spent since October 7th?
I think the objective facts of the situation on the ground, because this is a very politically charged and emotionally charged story. And it's not my job to make people feel comfortable or make them happy. It's to inform them and educate them about the truth of what's actually happening on the ground and to hold those in power accountable for their actions. And the truth on the ground is that the October 7th massacre was the largest slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. The Israeli response to that massacre has led to the highest death toll among Palestinian civilians in the history of their people. The Israelis have completely destroyed the Gaza Strip in their campaign against Hamas. They've killed tens of thousands of civilians in the process, along with an estimated 17,000 militants from Hamas and Islamic Jihad. But that's an uncomfortable reality. But it's the truth. We've been inside Gaza 5 separate times with the Israeli military on embeds. They are not allowing journalists free access to Gaza. We rely on the information that we receive from Palestinian journalists who are risking their lives on the ground. And more than 100 of them have been killed in the efforts to gather those images. And I think those are the things that people don't talk about as much that they should be talking about. Because war is not pretty. It is horrific. And the massacre was horrific, but the Israeli response against Gaza has also been horrific. And it's part of our role as journalists to shine light in all dark places. And that means coming to these communities before they're cleared and shining light here. And it also means shining light in Gaza to what's happening to the civilian population there. And it's the book, I think the biggest takeaway is holding two things that can be true at once. that you can call for the release of Israeli hostages. That's an objectively horrible thing, that these innocent civilians were dragged from their homes after their family members were executed. You should call for their release. But you can also call for the release, you can also call for the protection of Palestinian civilians amid the war. That civilians can be protected and hostages can be released at the same time.
And so last thing with you, Trey, then on that. So in the same way that you've shared so many details about October 7th, and this is for my own edification and for anybody watching, that I want them to be edified, to learn, to know. And by the way, I don't think knowing is apologizing for, and I don't think knowing is condemning. I think knowing is simply knowing the truth. What have you seen in sharing, like you did with the details of October 7th, from inside Gaza?
We've seen horrific things, entire neighborhoods wiped from the map, families, their entire bloodlines taken out in a single Israeli strike. And the Israelis are using very large bombs in Gaza, in some cases 2,000-pound bombs. And the statement that will be associated with that bombing is that it was a precise strike. It's very difficult to be super accurate and super precise with a weapon that large, with a piece of ammunition that large. And so that's what we've seen. We have seen entire neighborhoods destroyed. We have seen and smelled the people who are buried under the rubble. And so it's critical that we continue to report on that as well, because at the end of the day, we want to get as close to the reality as possible, gathering as much information as we can. And like you said, it doesn't mean that we support or deny. Our role as journalists is to shine light and to gather information. And sometimes that information can be challenging for people to receive, and it can also be challenging to view, but it doesn't make it any less important.
Well, Trey, this is the only real, I don't want to say that. Yeah, I can say that. This might be the only real conversation I've had with you. We've had, let me ask you a few questions on television. And honestly, this is obviously, it's my favorite conversation I've ever had with you. It's so candid and real, and I can't believe your background and where you're sitting in this very moment. And so I'll give you a very real compliment. This has been amazing, and the book is amazing, as has been your reporting for a year. I hope you and I can do this again. I would love for this to be an outlet where you can freely, like you, and Fox, you're free on Fox. I know that to be the case, but unstructured, to hear from you. I'd love for this to continue to be a platform for you from your phone like you are today. We don't have to have any fancy television setup, just what's real and what's true.
But, you know, we've got that fancy television set up, so the next time we can even do an extended conversation, not just about this, but the whole world. I mean, like, you know, we're covering this stuff every day, and I do find so much value in your reporting and your coverage, not just of the Middle East, but the whole world, and also the value in these conversations to dive deeper into these topics, because it's important.
Well, I'm going to take you up on that. I'm definitely going to take you up on that. All right, Get Black Saturday. I don't give a gratuitous endorsement. It is incredible. It is out now, and it's by Trey Yingst. Trey, thank you so much for being on the Will Cain Show.
Thank you, Will.
You know, I want to just follow up with what I said there when I was asking Trey that question about knowing is knowing. It's its own virtue. Now, what we do with knowledge is a separate and additional step. You know, for Trey to tell us about the horrific nature of things that are taking place in Gaza, this is me speaking personally, I can't speak for Trey now, is not to wave my hand or dismiss the plight of Palestinians. It's also not in any effort to condemn Israel. You know, war is hell, and Trey said that. And I know that's simple, but it's also a simple truth. And every war, and this is why it's so important to elect a commander-in-chief that truly understands the nature of war, but every war kills civilians. Now, I think context is important, and I do believe that this war being prosecuted in Gaza has some of the least civilian to combatant death ratios in the history of war. Less than World War II, which was absolutely atrocious. World War I is one of the worst in history, but less than Vietnam and less than the United States war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, that's not to say, well, it's okay. It's no big deal that family bloodlines are being wiped out the way that Trey describes. It's only to simply, again, to know. And the point of knowing is to try to acquire wisdom, and that our decisions, both as citizens and who we elect, and hopefully the wisdom of our leaders in understanding, what must be done, but the cost of what is done when you go to war. Incredible conversation with Trey Yingst. Pick up Black Saturday. What caught my attention in a busy news weekend? I'll walk you through some of the most outstanding sound and my reaction next on The Will Cain Show. I've been thinking about this. Maybe I should go into smut, pornography. It's the way to a massive audience, and then you just reposition yourself into respectability, and before you know it, the Vice President of the United States is on your show. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Just go over to Spotify, Apple, leave a 5-star review if you think it's so deserved. Leave a comment and subscribe to the Will Cain Show. If you're hanging out with us on YouTube or Facebook, jump into the comments section. I love to hear from you. I love that you're a member of our community, the Willisha. And hit subscribe while you're there on YouTube. Busy news weekend, busy news day. Let's walk through it with some of the things that caught my attention. First, Vice President Kamala Harris appeared on the Call Her Daddy podcast. Now, I don't want to dismiss the Call Her Daddy podcast because it's one of the biggest podcasts going. It's huge. I think Alex Cooper, the host of Call Her Daddy, who was one time, for context, at Barstool, I think she's being paid in the range of $30 million a year from Sirius. This podcast has millions and millions of listeners. Now, how did Alex Cooper get that? Well, by giving people instructions on how to give a proper blowjob and by talking to people about the best way to rack up a big body count or how to sleep with frat daddies. It's a sex podcast. At least in the past, but I think as recently as a week and a half ago, they were talking about how to sleep with alpha males. But she has graduated with this massive audience to getting big-time celebrity interviews. And her latest is with the Vice President of the United States and the Democratic Party's nominee for president, Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris hasn't given a lot of media interviews, and even those that she chooses to give are in friendly environments. And the next day or two, she's scheduled to be on Colbert, The View, Howard Stern. She did 60 Minutes and Call Her Daddy. So what'd they talk about? Well, they talked about abortion. They talked about female issues, largely female audience. Maybe some dudes out there looking for how to rack up a big body count inside the fraternity, but mostly chicks. And she said this in a conversation with Alex Cooper as they brainstormed, is there any example of the government trying to control men's bodies?
I want to pose this question more to you and the Daddy Gang, but one of the biggest conversations in this year's election revolves around a woman's body.
Yep.
I want to take a moment and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision.
I know what you're going to ask.
About a man's body. Let's
No.
Is there any law?
No.
It's
No.
I don't want to take for granted that anybody listening, by the way, as I'm referencing what this podcast is all about, knows the definition of body count. So for that, let's bring in our Gen Z millennial correspondent, Young Establishment, James. James, could you please tell us what is a body count?
It's turning red over here.
What is a
I
body
just don't know
count?
how to say it diplomatically.
I think it's easy.
It's very easy.
It's the amount of people you've engaged in relations with.
Sexual Congress.
You can say sex.
Indeed. Yes.
Yes, it's how many people you've managed to mate with. That's your body count. And that's the kind of thing they do on Call Her Daddy. Now, to the no, there's no law. There's no law where the government does anything to control the bodies of men. Let me see. Can I play? Can I play the game? I can come up with one. How about conscripting men's bodies into the military for use in war? How about the draft? Now, I understand we haven't had the draft in 50 years, but, and I'm not trying, okay, Will says draft and abortion. Let's just think for just one moment, because it was a broad question. Is there any law that governs men's bodies? Well, forcing men's bodies into the line of fire would, I think, qualify to answer the question on Call Her Daddy. Now, okay, maybe, Will, you're stretching. I don't know. Am I stretching? Because I would argue this. We are talking about someone interviewing, in the most friendly of fashions, interviewing for the job as the commander-in-chief of the United States. Not just the elected leader of the executive branch, but the jobs of the executive branch, which primarily include the national security and the foreign reach. The wisdom we just got on talking about when it comes to war. We're asking for the top. That's what the President of the United States is. The top, the commander-in-chief of the military. It's not about whether or not you grew up in a middle-class family. It's about whether or not you can be a modern-day George Washington. You have to know, because it is your number one job, and it should be top of mind that, yes, there is an example. It's actually my number one job responsibility, where we have laid on the line millions and millions of male bodies in defense of the United States of America. Now, I want to give credit, secondarily, to vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. Why? Because Tim Walz went into an adversarial environment. He gave an interview this past weekend with Fox News Sunday anchor Shannon Bream. And I mean that. I'm not saying that gratuitously. I appreciate him taking on a challenging interview. Separately, let's talk about his performance. Tim Walz was challenged by Shannon Bream on all host of issues that he's talked about, from freedom of speech, the First Amendment, misinformation, abortion, illegal immigration, and his misstatements when it comes to his own personal narrative, DUI arrest, IVF versus IUI, whether or not he served in a foreign theater of war, and whether or not he was in Tiananmen Square during the freedom protests. She challenged him on all of it, and that's great. And I don't think, while I give him an A for effort, I have to give him a D on the test. Here is Tim Walz and Shannon Bream on abortion.
I want to clarify what the law is there in Minnesota. Abortion Finder, a website that helps women find access, says abortion is legal throughout pregnancy in Minnesota. There is no ban or limit on abortion in Minnesota based on how far along in a pregnancy you are. You signed the bill that makes it legal through all 9 months. Is that a position you think Democrats should advocate for nationally?
Look, the vice president and I have been clear. The restoration of Roe versus Wade is what we're asking for.
But that law goes far beyond Roe v. Wade.
To make her own choice. The law is very clear. It does not change that. That was been debunked on every occasion.
But wait. Let's agree. What you signed is there's not a single limit through 9 months of pregnancy. Roe had a trimester framework that did have limits through the pregnancy. The Minnesota law does not have that.
This puts the decision with the woman and her health care providers. The situation we have is when you don't have the ability of health care providers to provide that, that's where you end up with a situation like Amanda Zaworski in Texas, where they are afraid to do what's necessary.
He also mentioned Amber Thurman, who Democrats are saying died because of new abortion laws. Shannon Bream checked him on that, saying every fact check and the doctors in the hospital and the family of Amber Thurman have said she died from complications, rare complications, but from an abortion pill. What you hear there, and I understand politics, I get it. You have your talking points, you have to avoid your weaknesses, and his talking point is the same as all talking points for Democrats when it comes to abortion. We want this in the hands of women. But when he had the opportunity to sign a law, which he did in Minnesota, there were no restrictions on abortion through 9 months. Now, that is unpopular. That is unpopular. Many of these Republican policies that might be pushed in someplace like Texas are not popular in other parts of the country. But everywhere, it's unpopular, the idea of a third trimester abortion. But that's the law that was pushed in Minnesota. So she challenges him on it, and he pivots to the talking point, we want it in the hands of the woman. The problem with that is you're lying. Like, you're lying by omission. You're lying by dodge. You're lying by not addressing the question. Is that what you want? Like, is that... See, that's the thing about this debate right now. It gets to avoid specifics on the left because if you keep reverting to the talking point, well, we want the choice to be for women. Okay, but what choice? Do you want third trimester abortions? Do you want partial birth abortions? Do you want what Governor Ralph Northam said in Virginia, that, you know, a baby can be left to die after it's born? That's true, by the way. We've played that sound. He said that. And if you just keep avoiding it, we want it to be hands of women, you're not being real. You're not being substantive. And you can't, I think as a listener, if you're listening and you're watching and you're pro-choice, you can't just revert to that talking point. You really can't. I want it to be a woman's choice. Okay, what does that mean? Can we talk about that? A choice at what stage? Every stage? And just keep going on until we reach the limit. And then we have a debate about the limit. Is it a woman's choice at 2 years post-birth? No, don't be ridiculous, Will. Okay. Is it a woman's choice at 1 month post-birth? Come on, Will. Is it a woman's choice 10 minutes post-birth? Well, now we're getting into something here. Is it a woman's choice 30 days prior to birth? Is it a woman's choice halfway through pregnancy? This is what we're talking about, and you can't do what Tim Walz did there. He did something worse afterwards, by the way. He posted that clip, and he posted on X, and his text was, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance will pass a national abortion ban. Now, both candidates have said repetitively they would not sign a national abortion ban. That's the end. Shannon Bream actually pressed him on that, and he said, they're lying. They're lying. Okay, well, what are we supposed to do? Like, I guess you have telepathy. I guess you know what they would do. They're telling everyone clearly what they will not do. But as of now, Tim Walz tweeting that out, that is misinformation. That's the thing he's railed against. He doesn't think that's protected by the First Amendment. Misinformation, and in his words, hate speech, not protected by the First Amendment. That also is misinformation. Of course, in the United States of America, misinformation and hate speech are protected by the First Amendment, because who defines what is misinformation and hate speech? God help us if it's Hillary Clinton, because that's what also caught my attention. Thirdly, on Saturday, when Hillary Clinton did the same thing John Kerry did the same thing Joe Biden did, said the same thing Kamala Harris has said, and tripled down on Tim Walz when it came to the First Amendment and censorship.
We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm.
We lose total control if they don't moderate the content. I know, like you know, there's a lot of BS on the internet. I'm going to tell you, one of the times you can most notably see that is in, the wake of a natural disaster. It's true. I saw it in Maui. Next thing you know, blue space lasers are coming down and burning homes. Okay? Trust me, I've seen it. And I'm sure there's a lot of BS flying around what's happening in North Carolina. I want to talk for a moment about North Carolina. North Carolina has become a situation, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, where people are criticizing the government, rightfully, I believe, in many occasions, perhaps unfairly on some occasions, but either way, being dismissed as merchants of disinformation. The head of FEMA said that it's dangerous what is going around. There's debates about, over $1.4 billion in FEMA money going to illegal immigrants, the resettlement of migrants in the United States. And, did it come from this bucket? That doesn't pull from that bucket. And these funds are designated for this. That doesn't hurt the funds designated for hurricane, and so forth. the likes of George Stephanopoulos and Welker on NBC, challenging Tom Cotton, challenging Republican politicians over what they call disinformation. J.D. Vance was on Fox and Friends this morning. I asked him this. I said, can you talk to me about what's happening, the attention given to North Carolina? And I don't think it's unfair if you're sitting in the mountains of North Carolina to go, what kind of attention do we get versus the attention given to Ukraine? I'm not talking about media attention. I'm talking about attention from my elected leaders. What kind of attention do we get versus illegal immigrants? What kind of attention do we get versus Kamala Harris tweeting out at 7:30 p.m., we're going to give $157 more million to the people of Lebanon, followed up an hour later, 8:30 p.m. by, we're going to give $100 million to the people of North Carolina. And I asked J.D. Vance about this, and I asked about those priorities, and I thought he did a great job. And his answer was as follows. You can talk about the buckets. You can talk about pulling from this or that. But what we see here is a crisis of incompetence when it comes to leadership. It's like crisis disaster run by the DMV. And I think that's exactly right. You need a true leader with a business mindset that understands that when something happens, you dive in. You don't start looking for the bureaucratic rules. You don't shut down private citizens running helicopters in to save people. You don't have, in the analogy of the DMV, a 2-hour-long wait to get your picture taken and test your 20/20 vision. You get it done. That's what you do, and that's what it is you need from your leader. Wisdom, like we talked about with Trey Yingst, and action, as talked about with J.D. Vance. Now I want to bring North Carolina back to this conversation about misinformation and disinformation. We have never in my knowledge had a political party so openly embrace censorship. The saviors of democracy are the biggest threat to our constitutional republic. The saviors of democracy who would suggest that your free speech, and by the way, your free ability to listen, because when you censor, you don't just deprive the person speaking, you deprive the person listening. What could they hear? What could they be exposed to? The truth? We've never in my memory had such a fundamental value, not of Western civilization, because the United States is an outpost, even within the West, undercut by one party openly and telling you this is who we are. Finally, Michael Cohen, one of the biggest one-time advocates, now detractor of Donald Trump, he's taken it to another level. Speaking of misinformation, this is what he had to say on MSNBC about a future under Donald Trump.
The big warning that I want people to understand is when Donald Trump says something, stop sane-washing it. Stop trying to make it into something which has some normalcy to it. What he says he intends to do. And when he turns around and says, Jen, to, like the head of this network or other people who are critics, that he intends to use SEAL Team 6 or the military within which to round up his critics or his opponents, he intends to do it. And I say that with firsthand experience.
It got better until the end, and he stuck the landing. That's like a gymnast landing on 2 feet and throwing Tim Walz hands in the air. Perfect 10. SEAL Team 6, gonna go after opponents and critics. And he's seen firsthand experience of Donald Trump doing it. Incredible. So where does that leave us? In the state of the race, Donald Trump had a massive rally this weekend in Butler, Pennsylvania. A return of the site where he had his first assassination attempt in July. Thousands and tens of thousands of people showed up. Elon Musk showed up, as did the grieving family of Corey Comparatore, the firefighter who threw his body over his family to save them that day and lost his life. Incredible rally, an incredible well of support, and an incredible endorsement from Elon Musk. Harry Enton from CNN says the right track, wrong track polls in the country show that Only roughly 25% of Americans feel like the country is on the right track. That's not good for an incumbent. And despite the misinfo image being painted, she's an incumbent, Kamala Harris. We'll see how that plays in Pennsylvania. We'll see how that plays in North Carolina. It was a weekend of upsets. Down goes Alabama, but still upright, wobbly, but upright. The Dallas Cowboys. Next on the Will Cain Show. Five top 11 teams in college football go down. And I will admit, I didn't get to stay up until the wee hours of the morning to see still standing the Dallas Cowboys. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, on the Fox News Facebook page. Just hit subscribe on YouTube. Come hang out with us on the Will Cain Show page on Facebook. And listen to us whenever and however you like by subscribing on Apple or on Spotify. Let's see if we can do it together, because I don't know that I can rattle off all of the top teams in college football that suffered an upset. Let's do it saving the best for last. So Michigan lost. 1. USC lost. 2. Tennessee lost. That's 3. These are all top 11 teams. Who am I forgetting that's a top 11 team that was also upset this weekend? Of course, I'm not talking about the big one, but there's one more top 11 team that lost this weekend besides Michigan, USC, and Tennessee. Everyone is furiously scrambling.
Searching
looking
so
at their
hard.
phones.
Missouri, yeah.
Missouri.
Oh, you got back from the bathroom just in time.
They lost to A&M.
I've been here.
No, not you.
Not you. Young James had to go poop
Oh.
and barely made it back in time for the show. Missouri lost big to Texas A&M. And that left us with the biggest upset of the weekend. Vanderbilt.
Dang.
For the first time in 50 years, beating a top-ranked team, took down Alabama.
Harvard of the South.
I watched. Did you guys watch?
Some of it.
Awesome. I mean, they turned, do I have his name right? Is it Diego Pavia?
Believe so.
Quarterback for Vanderbilt into a hero in about a 2-hour
right.
time frame. And he was awesome. He was incredible. And they kept showing shots of his brothers. His story's awesome. He is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He could not get a scholarship anywhere to go to college. I think reportedly Texas Tech offered him to walk on. He said, I think I'm better than that. And I think he went to a junior college first before eventually getting to New Mexico State. Now, New Mexico State, I know this because I did a piece on this one time while I was at ESPN, is maybe the worst Division I historical football program in the country. Like, they've got a horrific record. He goes to New Mexico State, and he leads them to a victory last year over Auburn. Huge upset. All right, his lifelong dream, they say, is to play in the SEC. He grew up idolizing Johnny Manziel. Loves Johnny football.
It's so weird to me.
Not when
because he's so young.
That you're young enough to think back on Johnny Manziel.
Exactly,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre.
Well, his post-game interview had a lot of Johnny Manziel to it. He said, Vandy, we turned. But he dreamed of playing in the SEC. He dreamed of being Johnny football, and so he ends up at Vanderbilt. And by the way, brings along with him his former quarterback competition from New Mexico State. That guy ends up being a tight end at Vandy, and he torched Alabama, that tight end. It was awesome. Bama could not stop Diego Pavia. Could not stop him. Every time Alabama answered, he answered back. It was Hagler Hearns. It was punch, counterpunch, back and forth. And I mean, look, it showed some real holes in Alabama's ability to defend. That's for sure. And I thought, it was Cole Kublik was the play-by-play guy for ESPN. And I can't remember who the announcer was. The play-by-play guy, Cole Kublik, was the color analyst. They were talking about it, so they were explaining it so well. Vandy would oftentimes not do much on first down. It was like, oh, they only got a yard or two. And they said, don't worry about it. they're feeling out every first down the way Alabama's defending them. And sure enough, the second play, the second down, was a riff off of what they did on first down that Alabama couldn't be prepared for. It was really chess. It was awesome.
You got to admit, though, this would not happen under Saban. With this same exact team, this loss would not happen, right?
They had some loss. I mean, they lost A&M and Johnny Football.
I know, but this just seems like something Saban would not let happen.
Lost to Tennessee a few years.
Saban's been losing it a little bit.
Saban said on game day,
Yeah.
the only guaranteed win in the SEC is Vanderbilt.
They played it in the stadium after the win. They played that clip of him.
Now, the fans tore down the goalposts, carried them out of the stadium, down Broadway in Nashville.
Love it.
And dumped them in the river.
It's so sick.
God, who knew Vandy kids could party?
I like people online were complaining about it. They're like, that's school property. Shut up.
That sounds so Vandy of them.
It's fun. Do it.
Just people?
They're
Anybody
like,
of note?
Yeah, no one of note, but they're like, these students shouldn't be rioting. Where are their parents? Shut up. That's stupid. Let them have fun. They're not hurting anybody. Let them do it.
You point out they did pay for those goalposts.
They did pay for those goalposts with their tuition.
No, you got to have your moment.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this with some hopefulness. Those moments only come every so often. So you got to relish it. And I say that with hopefulness because Texas has Vandy in Nashville. And all of a sudden,
Good luck,
everybody's
bud.
talking about how easy Texas's SEC schedule is.
Yeah.
Really? Based on what? Your preseason rankings? Because Texas has Oklahoma this weekend, then Georgia, then Vanderbilt. They also, by the way, these were other easy games they were supposed to get. Arkansas, who just upset Tennessee.
Oh,
Kentucky, who took down Ole Miss.
Looked good against Georgia.
And A&M, who just took down Missouri. Go ahead. You get 30 seconds on the clock. Go ahead, Tinfoil.
I mean, it's very possible that a lot of these schools in the SEC are just mid, and then they're just beating up on each other. Here's a thought.
Yeah, it's not a great thought.
Why do they keep winning national championships? It's weird, though, right?
I'm not saying there aren't elite programs at the top.
No, but
they filter out
use
between
the
3 and
loss.
5 teams.
Here's what you do. You use a loss to Arkansas, and this is how your argument goes. And you go, well, Arkansas is mid. That means Tennessee's mid. You use a loss to Kentucky, and you say Kentucky's mid. That means Ole Miss is mid. And you undercut everybody. And by the way, Alabama, presumably one of the elite teams you're talking about, or Georgia or Texas, just lost to Vanderbilt. So you would, by the transitive property, continue to say everything's mid until we get to the playoffs, and the SEC barnstorms through the playoffs and destroys the other conferences. So you say mid all season, and then when it's finally your turn to prove the mid, you lose. You, meaning Oklahoma, Florida State, Ohio State, and I give Ohio State credit. They've been there more than others, but Big Ten, ACC, Big 12, you talk your game all regular season, and then when it gets to the postseason, you lose. And I'm not a Mr. SEC now. I just think that there's a anti-SECism. You even referenced Danny Cannell in your pre-show note,
I saw
which
that.
just shows me like you're literally doing the anti-SEC thing. It's like, okay, you can't be so anti-woke that you become woke. Yeah, that's a real thing. That's a real thing you have to be careful of. And I think you're so anti-SEC that, you've undercut, I don't know, what is it, 10 out of the last 12 national champions or something like that.
The teams at the top have really good blue chip ratios. But I mean, other conferences can win national championships. Michigan won last year. It's not impossible for other conferences to win. But usually we're cycling through, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, and now Texas. And those are going to be your top 4 or 5, and they kind of have up and down years. But I'm just saying, like,
you're holding
we
against
tend
them.
We tend to elevate those bottom teams, and we de-elevate the mid teams or the good teams in other conferences.
You are requiring them to go undefeated, or it proves your purpose. That's what you're saying. If you lose to Vandy, or if you lose to Kentucky, then you're a fraud. You're requiring them to go undefeated to be real. Hey, by the way, on that note, how did Florida State do this weekend?
Better. I mean, we're getting better. We finally have the quarterback situation.
You lost to Clemson by like
delusional
by like 14 or 15, right?
You should have lost by
moral victories
30.
Oh, I see. So better because you didn't lose by 30 like you did to SMU.
Elite.
You only lost by 15 to Clemson.
It's progress.
It's not. I didn't say Florida State is an elite team this year.
Just last
year. They were last year.
It's not going to beat the secret
that didn't
Democrat
matter.
allegations.
Oh, so bitter. So fun. By the way, I didn't stay up last night. I went to bed because I had to host Fox and Friends this morning. That means with a rain delay, game started at 9:45 Eastern time, Sunday Night Football. That's terrible. That is terrible. Even if I didn't host Fox and Friends, I don't think I would have been able to stay up.
I'm tired.
Did you stay up? Did you watch?
Yeah, I watched the whole thing.
What time did it end?
12:20, something like that.
12:20
yeah.
Eastern?
Eastern. Dak, I was worried about him a little bit. A couple late interceptions.
I woke up this morning. I do this with English football a lot. If I miss a game, I go to YouTube and I do extended highlights.
Yeah.
And they have the 15-minute version of the game. I've never really done that with the NFL or college football because I usually watch the game. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
I mean, you get the sense of what happened in the game, but you just don't get all the feelings that you're there for if you watch a real game. Like, you don't ride the roller coaster. It's like somebody explaining to you the roller coaster. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, and this is where it's all going to end. You're like, okay, so now I get the path of the roller coaster, but you don't feel the roller coaster. And watching those extended highlights of Cowboys Steelers, I mean, Dak looked like he validated all the criticisms. I mean, 3 turnovers. He threw 2 picks basically in scoring position. Like the Cowboys were driving and in scoring position, he turned the ball over. But when it came down to it, he did 2 things. He fell on that fumble, which was huge on the goal line.
Scary.
Cowboys with, 30 seconds left in the game, trying to score. Was it on 3rd down? Rico Dowdle fumbles at the goal line, and Dak pounces on it.
I was convinced they weren't going to score that last touchdown on 4th down.
Again, I didn't watch the game to feel it, but even watching the extended highlights, I'm like, I could see if I were watching last night, I would have been hugely pessimistic.
The momentum felt like they weren't going to score and win that game at that point in the end.
But Dak does.
Ugh.
On 4th down, Dak throws a touchdown. Jalen Tolbert. Cowboys win. So I said they survived, but they're wobbly. It doesn't feel, I don't feel confident after that by any stretch of the imagination. I will say, if I'm looking for sources of confidence, like defense, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Deron Bland, now Marshawn. I mean, they got dudes out all over defense. We should say it was an incredible weekend in football, in the NFL. Both. All the upsets on Saturday, and then like last minute, field goals to win games in the NFL. What a weekend for football. I'll tell you what, we'll talk about that more this week. It's going to be a big week here on the Will Cain Show. This has been an awesome episode. I've loved talking to Trey Yingst and working through the things that caught my attention, all the way including a football game till 1 a.m. I will get a little sleep and see you again next time.